Tonight on Primetime, the US and Iran have agreed a deal to end the war. A framework for peace has reportedly been finalized. The Strait of Hormuz is set to reopen, but Israel says its forces will stay in Lebanon. Finally, a deal then. But what does this mean for Israel and Lebanon? Good evening. The United States and Iran have reached a framework agreement to end hostilities. Well, it follows months of conflict between Israel, the US and Iran. Here's more.
The United States and Iran have reached a framework agreement to end hostilities. US President Donald Trump announced on social media on Sunday. In a series of posts, Trump confirmed the deal is complete, authorizing the toll-free reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and calling for the immediate removal of the US naval blockade. He added that the deal will be signed on Friday. His announcement came shortly after Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced the agreement on social media, stating that it is intended to end fighting on all fronts, including Lebanon. Shehbaz Sharif also confirmed that an official signing ceremony is scheduled for Friday, June 19th in Switzerland. Reports indicate that US Vice President J.D. Vance may attend, while Trump's participation has not been fully confirmed. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi, speaking on state TV, confirmed that the Memorandum of Understanding is finalized and that the US naval blockade against Iran will end Sunday night. He confirmed that military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, will cease immediately and permanently. Iran's Supreme National Security Council also issued a statement confirming that military operations on all fronts will halt immediately and that the US blockade on Iranian shipping will be lifted. Following the announcement, the United Kingdom, France, Germany and Italy said on Sunday that they are prepared to lift sanctions on Iran in response to steps taken on its nuclear program. In a joint statement, the leaders emphasized that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon and said they are ready to work with the United States, Iran and the IAEA to ensure compliance. Full implementation of the agreement is expected after the signing ceremony Friday, with Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Turkey credited for facilitating the negotiations.
Now, Iran has said that reaching an understanding with the US to end the war does not mean Tehran will forego what it describes as war crimes against Iranians. Our correspondent Toraz Shirililo reports now from Tehran.
Iran's foreign ministry stressed on Monday that Tehran will neither forget nor forgive the US and Israel for committing war crimes against Iran. Spokesman Ismail Baghai made this statement at the press briefing following the agreement of a ceasefire between Tehran and Washington. He reiterated that demanding war damages is an item in the Memorandum of Understanding agreed by both sides. Baghai also said the US has undertaken the rollback of sanctions on Iran's oil and gas exports, as well as on Tehran's civilian nuclear program. With regard to Lebanon, he said respect for the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity is mentioned 3 times in the agreement.
The end of the war covers all fronts, including Lebanon. It respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon. I believe this phrase makes it completely clear what any agreement in this regard must include.
Answering a question from a reporter, the spokesman added that Iran does not trust Israel or the US to carry out their obligations. Therefore, he said, Iran demands the adoption of a UN Security Council resolution as a guarantee for the memorandum's implementation. He confirmed that both Iran and the US agreed to meet in Switzerland in the coming days to sign the MOU. Prior to that, a number of regional visits are scheduled. As an aside, Baghai also answered the question about Iran's team at the World Cup, thanking Mexican authorities for the hospitality extended to Iran's national football squad to set up their training camp for the tournament. The team arrived in Los Angeles on Monday to play against New Zealand under the agreement that they would have to leave the U.S. immediately after the match. Turaj Shiralilu from Iranian Foreign Ministry for A News.
Now, as expected, world leaders and the United Nations have welcomed the diplomatic breakthrough, emphasizing the immediate need to restore maritime stability and secure global energy corridors ahead of the formal signing ceremony in Switzerland. Here's a roundup of world reactions.
Major Western powers and global markets are calling for the swift execution of the US-Iran peace agreement. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called for the unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to restore freedom of navigation, pointing to the direct relief it will bring to domestic and global economies.
This is a hugely significant moment. We have long called for de-escalation, and it is vital that all parties seize this opportunity to secure stability in the region and restore freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz.
This optimism was echoed by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who described the deal as a breakthrough for the global economy. Within the European Union, institutional backing focused heavily on the economic and security guarantees of securing the vital maritime corridor.
Well, it is much welcomed, and finger crossed that it will be also initialized on Friday, because everybody needs the Strait of Hormuz to be open and actually this war to stop. So it is much welcomed, and we hope that it will last.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres formally congratulated both Washington and Tehran on the permanent ceasefire, while acknowledging the constructive role played by regional nations in supporting the negotiations. This global consensus is reflected across the Asia-Pacific, where Canberra emphasised the far-reaching economic benefits of the deal.
We want this agreement to stick because it is in the interests of people in that region to end the military conflict, but it's also in the interests of the entire world.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed the agreement as a crucial step for regional tranquility, while urging all parties to refrain from provocations. Support for the agreement also came from the South Caucasus and Central Asia. Azerbaijan welcomed the agreement reached between the United States and Iran, with the country's foreign ministry also expressing appreciation for the important mediating role played by Pakistan throughout the negotiation process. From the South Caucasus, Georgia likewise welcomed the agreement reached between the United States and Iran on the Memorandum of Understanding. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan also said on X that he hoped the significant development would pave the way for a comprehensive and lasting peace across the Middle East. In Central Asia, Kazakhstan expressed hope that the signing of the peace agreement would lay a solid foundation for strengthening peace and stability in the Middle East and beyond.
Well, reports of the peace deal have, though, drawn criticism from some Israelis who claim that while the deal benefits America, it might not bring lasting security and stability to the region.
A very bad agreement, as I hear in the media and as I hear from the Iranians and some Americans. I really don't understand Trump. I don't understand him. On the other hand, we went to war with them, and I see that they're essentially moving forward, and in my opinion, they have won. It's all about the mood there. It can't be like this. They will receive funds. The regime will not fall. And in my opinion, it's a catastrophe.
Well, I'm a Northerner and I'm not very happy about it. I think it will last maybe 2 years until Trump is ending his term, and then we'll go back to the same thing.
It's a bad agreement. Iran will not keep the agreement. As a matter of fact, I think that the whole thing was a betrayal with the Iranian people and Israeli people, because it's only American interest here, and it's for the matter of national security of Israel. This is the worst agreement that could ever be done.
I don't think it's going to last because the Iranians vowed to annihilate Israel. So when you sign an agreement with them, it just delay of their goals to destroy Israel and America. And I wish there were peace between Israel, Iran, but it's not gonna last, sorry.
Well, joining us now from New York is Dr. Mark Merovitz, Professor at the State University of New York Maritime College. Dr. Merovitz, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight on Primetime. So, a deal then, finally done, the world leaders breathing a sigh of relief. I guess the next big question is, will it last?
Well, I mean, the Iranians are certainly feeling relief and jubilation. Their economy was way down. The Strait of Hormuz was blockaded. The sanctions were effective. They were down. They were finished. And now they've gotten a lifeline from President Trump. Let's be realistic. And the rest of the world is chiming in as well. But why? Well, it's domestic politics. President Trump was worried about the midterms, worried about the gas prices, worried about the economy, worried about the Strait of Hormuz, and he basically, again, capitulated to the Iranian demands and is entering into an agreement, whatever that may be. It's sort of a letter of intent, an agreement to agree on Friday, maybe, to agree on what, we're really not clear, and how to implement that, we're not clear. So, again, I'm really, I think, somewhat surprised and disappointed at the result, because it's a lot of wishful thinking.
Interesting.
And not a lot of details.
Yeah, hopefully those details will come, I guess. I mean, the Iranians are claiming victory. Mr. Trump, as expected, is also claiming victory. What is it that both sides get from this, as far as you can tell so far, that enables them to claim victory at home?
Well, I mean, for President Trump, opening the Strait of Hormuz, clearing and making this deal, which will boost the stock market, which will boost the gas prices, which will help him in the midterms. All of those are what he's focusing on. He's not really looking at the regional international issues at all. Iran is really, I think, the winner on this one, because if you see what they're saying about the deal, certainly the Iranian news agency, $24 billion of frozen assets are going to be released, half of which the Iranians want released even at the beginning of the 60-day period. So there's 5 days to sign something, a 2-page agreement or something like that, and then 60 days to negotiate a full agreement, but funds will be released. At the same time, the United States' main objective was also to stop the Iranian nuclear program. And President Trump said he wanted that nuclear dust, the enriched material, out. Where is that? Nowhere clearly. And also the ballistic missile program and the support for proxies, the Iranian news agency has said clearly that is not involved in this deal. So honestly, at the end of the day, we may even be worse than we were before the war began. So at the end of the day, we do have ships passing in the night. Iranians want their funds, they want their economy back. Even opening the Strait of Hormuz is going to help them, because once the shipping starts flowing, then they will be able to get their oil, their resources, their businesses going. China will benefit, by the way, since 80 to 90% of their resources come from through the Strait of Hormuz. And then we're kind of not, where are we altogether in terms of Iran, charging fees and tolls and all of these new issues that came up. I mean, how is it possible that Iran, that was virtually destroyed, is now capable of demanding frozen assets at the beginning of the deal? What is the deal? This is the question. So I think President Trump, who is the art of the deal, he wrote the art of the deal, I think he got flim-flammed and outmaneuvered by the Iranian negotiators, who've been around the region for ages and ages, and they outmaneuvered him, and they got a deal that was inconceivable when the war started.
Yeah, it certainly looked like towards the last few weeks that it was President Trump that wanted the deal more than the Iranians in terms of what was going on with the negotiations. he was very focused, President Trump, on wanting to deliver something that was better than the situation that existed under President Obama. But from what you're saying is there's no real evidence that that's happened.
Well, but the JCPOA under Obama was 159 pages of negotiating teams working to get the details right. It was a flawed agreement. Trump dropped out of it because he said it was a terrible agreement, yet it had the outlines of an agreement. It had at least the form of an enforcement mechanism with the IAEA, etc. If the objective is to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, has that been achieved? Well, no, because we have no idea what Iran is going to do on all these fronts with nuclear materials or anything. We don't know anything. And by the way, normally with negotiations, you have a team come in, work on the ground, get all with the other side, working on I'm a lawyer, this is what you do. But here it's backwards. We announce there's a deal. 5 days from now, we're going to sign something. By the way, Guy, interestingly enough, J.D. Vance is going to the ceremony, not Trump. I think I know why. Because if it goes wrong, he wants to blame J.D. Vance. He doesn't want to take the blame for it. Because I think he's realistic. He knows he's been flim-flammed. He knows he's been scammed. And then 5 days and then 60 days to negotiate one of the most complicated deals in the history of international relations. Never they're going to do 60 days like they did with the ceasefire. They're going to do another 60 days and another 60 days. And there's never going to be a real agreement with enforceability with the IAEA. They know what they're doing. And the Iranians have avoided compliance. How are you going to get in compliance now? The only way you get compliance is with sanctions and with having Iran trying to get them to recognize that they lost the war, but they won't do that. In fact, now they won the war. So we are actually in, I think, a very bad place at this point.
Yeah,
it's totally confusing, ambiguous, and uncertain.
It's a very interesting point you make, Mark. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz has, as you say, though, reopened or will reopen in the coming days, we hope. We've seen a little bit of a market reaction to that. I mean, how long do you think it will take, assuming that it does remain open, for normality to resume, market confidence to look a little bit more sustainable?
Oh, I mean, it is clear. Look. Think of it this way: the Strait of Hormuz was open when the war started. Then the Iranians blockaded, and we blockaded it too. Okay, so we're basically status quo ante. We're basically where we were back when the war started, with the Strait of Hormuz open. So I think yes, the markets and gas prices and all of that they're all going to react very well, so long as there's no further cataclysm or catastrophe. The only, let us say, fly in the ointment is Lebanon. Why? Because as you so interestingly put out on your package and your discussion, the Iranian spokesman says that the sovereignty of Lebanon, territorial integrity of Lebanon is very important. Who's preventing the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon? Hezbollah. I mean, the government of Lebanon wants Hezbollah to put its arms down and to let Lebanon become a regular, normal state, but Hezbollah won't allow it because they're supported by Iran. So who's interfering with that? Is that Israel? I mean, as you talked about Israel, I think Israel is the major loser on this deal. And what if Israel's attacked again by Hezbollah? What if it's attacked by ballistic missiles or drones from Iran? Is the president saying, as he said, Israel, you cannot defend yourself? That becomes a very problematic thing because, I mean, I think that nations in the region understand the right of self-defense. Self-defense is a cardinal principle in the United Nations Charter. So what's going on here? So in other words, Iran says the war has ended on all fronts. This is the craziest chess game I've ever heard about, Guy. I don't get it. You mean Lebanon is part of the fronts that Iran is fighting? They admit that because that Hezbollah is their proxy? I mean, it's crazy. Israel's not supposed to defend itself, and President Trump is telling them not to defend themselves. How does that fly?
I mean,
part of it is confusing to me.
It is interesting, isn't it, Mark? As you say, many of the toughest issues, whether it's nuclear enrichment, missiles, regional proxies, the big one being that Israel are not going to stop going after Hezbollah in Lebanon. That will cause all sorts of knock-on effects, as we've discussed. With all of that still unresolved, or those issues deferred, let's be generous and say that they've been deferred. Is doing that in order to sign something now a smart move or a strategic error, do you think?
I mean, there's no problem in signing a letter of intent. We do that in corporate transactions all the time. That's an agreement to agree. That's an outline of an agreement. But what's the outline? What's the agreement? Is the agreement that Israel can't defend itself against Hezbollah? Hezbollah can be built up by Iran? Is the agreement that ballistic missiles, the Iranian news agency said ballistic missiles and support for proxies is not part of the deal. Now, I mean, that's not going to be in the agreement. And the bottom line also I would mention is the people in Iran. I thought President Trump said to the people of Iran, help is on the way. I'm coming to help you. I don't know. I'm looking around. I want to see if that's going to be in the MOU. Look, in the great agreements in history have been negotiated carefully and have meaning. Sometimes they're violated, right? So this one, I don't think has any meaning. Because if it's an agreement to agree, it should have the outlines of a real agreement that gets fleshed out. I don't see yet the outlines of what is the actual agreement here. Except that everybody's sitting back and what a sigh of relief in Europe, in Asia, everywhere. Everybody's commending President Trump for working this thing out. And I don't know about you, but I'm sitting around, and so are many of the experts and politicians in the world. I mean, I'm looking on Twitter, on X, and everybody's scratching their heads trying to figure out, what's the deal? What is the deal? What is Iran going to actually commit to do? And then are they actually going to do it? I think the room for optimism of whether Iran is going to do it or do what they promised to do is not a very, very good source of optimism based on how they handle Obama's JCPOA.
And what about those details? As those details are being worked out, I mean, how fragile do you think the ceasefire is? I mean, is it if Hezbollah and Israel, if that situation continues progressing in the way it has been progressing, is that going to be something that potentially could break this ceasefire, do you think?
I mean, I think that's a very astute and excellent question. This is precisely, Guy, why the Iranians put that into their statements and into their conditions, that the ceasefire has to be on all fronts. They understand that the likelihood is that the situation will be postponed and will be pushed forward by conflict in Lebanon. They understand that. Because as long as Hezbollah is attacking Israel, and as President Trump is telling Israel, don't respond, I mean, this is something Israeli leadership has said, and I've seen it on Twitter, on statements that they've made, and I don't know any country that would say, okay, the U.S. told me that if I'm attacked, I can't respond. So the Iranians know that. And I think they've built it in to allow this process to be punted, to be pushed forward. But in the meantime, they want to get money of unfrozen assets, the $24 billion that they want to receive, right? They want to get half of it now. So I think their idea is, get me an infusion of money from the frozen assets, open the Strait of Hormuz so my economy can get back on going, because I need that shipping, that revenue from the commercial shipping. I need to get my oil, my resources out there, because otherwise my resources industry is crushed. And then we can sit around and keep promoting the ceasefire another 60 days, another 60 days, another 60 days, and 60 days. And then finally, maybe we'll have some kind of an agreement, and then we won't even follow it. I think that's what's really going on here. And I have to say the Iranians are very, very astute negotiators. And against the deal maker, who is Donald Trump, I think, he has been totally outmaneuvered. And by the way, the other point is, which is very important, Senator Lindsey Graham, a friend of the president, says, oh, what about Congress? No, you've got to have J.D. Vance and his team come to Congress and discuss this and get our approval. Can you imagine? I mean, this thing is never going to get done if it's going to be in Congress, in hearings in Congress. And the Iranians know this. They absolutely know this. They've worked this out. So they want to get the funds, the sanctions relief, the Strait of Hormuz open right now so that their economy can get back on track and they can do all the things they do, including ballistic missiles and maybe the nuclear program and supporting Hezbollah. The United States is sitting there trying to work something out, and the United States in good faith, and I think we're going to have a hard time doing that.
Dr. Moravec, it's always great to get your take. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you.
Huge pleasure.
Okay, after the break, Kyiv is once again under heavy attack as Russia intensifies strikes ahead of the G7 summit, with diplomacy continuing behind the scenes. Are we seeing pressure for peace or pressure before a new phase of the war? Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. At least 10 people have been killed and dozens injured in Russian attacks across Ukraine overnight, including in Kyiv and Kharkiv. The strikes also damaged a UNESCO-listed monastery in the capital and drew strong condemnation from European leaders.
Russia launched one of its largest aerial attacks on Ukraine overnight. It fired 70 missiles and more than 600 drones at targets across the country, according to Ukraine's military. The barrage targeted Kyiv and several other regions, with air defences intercepting most of the incoming weapons. However, some missiles and drones reached their targets, causing casualties and damage to residential areas, energy infrastructure and cultural sites. In Kyiv, the Kyiv-Pechersk-Lavra Monastery, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of Ukraine's most important religious landmarks, was also hit. Russia denied striking the monastery directly, saying the damage was caused by a Ukrainian Patriot air defense missile. Ukraine rejected the claim and blamed Russia. Russian strikes also hit other regions, like Kharkiv and Sumy, where local authorities reported deaths, injuries and damage. The damage to the monastery has drawn strong international criticism. French President Emmanuel Macron condemned the attack as unjustified and said efforts to secure a ceasefire would be discussed at the G7 summit. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said strikes that damaged a UNESCO site amounted to war crimes. Meanwhile, Ukraine continued its own long-range attacks inside Russia. Russian officials reported casualties following a Ukrainian drone strike on the city of Tula. Ukrainian forces also said they targeted transport links connecting Russian-controlled Crimea with other occupied territories.
Well, the strikes come just as international attention turns to the G7 summit and after US President Donald Trump held separate conversations with Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, Washington says efforts to find a path forward to ending the war continue, while Trump's envoys are expected back in Moscow for further talks. Well, let's go to New York now and speak to Yulia O'Connell, Director of Development at Dignitas, a non-profit organisation providing disaster relief in Ukraine. Yulia, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to have you on the show. We're at the very moment when diplomacy appears to be accelerating, and yet Moscow is escalating attacks. Why?
Well, thank you for having me, but their answers are kind of simple. Moscow is unreliable in what they are saying. They are lying. That Ukrainians know very well how Putin and his crony and his regime, like liars. Answer, because anytime Putin says he wants to have some kind of peace negotiations or have a call with President Trump, then he doubled down the attacks on Ukraine, and this time it was barrage, as you said, as they said in the news, barrage of 700 drones and missiles. So it's very easy in a way for Ukrainians to understand. Russians, it's hard for the world to understand that Putin is simply a liar. And negotiations with the liar, getting into the table with somebody who multiple times lied, is not worthy of a real of time and efforts of real diplomacy.
And Julia, I get that your perspective, it's very clear. I understand your opinion of President Putin. But nevertheless, what do you think is going on in the minds of those in the Kremlin in terms of what they're thinking? You know, are these strikes about military objectives, or is this about political messaging in some way ahead of the G7?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the minds of Putin and everybody in the Kremlin and everybody who is pushing the button to do the strikes on Ukraine, in their mind, Ukraine is not a country. They deny Ukraine national identity. So they do not believe that Ukraine is has a right to exist. Therefore, they're going to, and they also believe that they can win this war. They also believe that the size of a Russian country, the number of people who live there, the number of people they recruit and send into the grinding machine, eventually would be enough to win this war and occupy the full Ukraine. That's what is their mind. That's for Ukrainians, pretty clear that these ideas are crazy, but we've seen it for so long, and we kind of adjusted not to really focus what in their minds, but to focus on how we can protect Ukraine, how we can protect the country, how can we develop our golden dome, if you wish, in that regard, how to protect our sky, because as we know that NATO did not provide originally enough support to Ukraine in 2022, and the war continued, escalated, and Ukraine learned and developed. Basically, we developed our own, in a way, Golden Dome against, at least against the Shahid drones. We still need a lot of, Ukraine still needs a lot of air defense against missiles, so those missiles do hit Ukrainian land pretty regularly. But in a way, what Ukrainians are focused on, and thank God Europe is focused on right now, is how to defend the country, how to prove, it's almost no way to prove Putin that he cannot win this war. In his mind, he can. But what the Europe and Ukraine is doing is defending in a way that at least he cannot move further at the front line.
Now, we were talking earlier with Mark Merovitz about President Trump and the art of the deal, different views on his efficacy in that respect. But President Trump has now spoken to both President Putin and President Zelensky. Do you see any signs at all of a diplomatic opening?
Well, President Zelensky, as probably a lot of people know, wrote an open letter to Putin, stating that he is ready to sit down and have a conversation, one-on-one with Putin. Putin took it as Putin believed it was a mockery to him. He invited Zelensky to come to Moscow, which obviously President Zelensky will never do, because it would be probably his last trip anywhere. It would be like, for Russians, it would be, doesn't matter what they would say, it would be operation of eliminating Ukrainian president, which they attempted multiple times to do. President Trump is kind of okay for them to, deal between themselves. He doesn't want to get that much involved. Plus, his hands are really tied in Iran. He also expected that Iranian, it would be a short special operation, but unfortunately, in in opinion of many people who understand drone warfare, and Indignitas, we do understand it pretty well, we kind of saw that American forces moving to Iran without full understanding how the drone war is being handled, handed right now is really not a good idea. We know that he was advised not to do it, but he decided to do it very quick operation. And now he is really, his hands are really tied by this problem with Iran, because they can produce multiple drones. They know how to use multiple drones. They can do this for a long time. So we don't see that, Trump's administration is going to be really being involved in bringing peace or negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. What we do see is Ukraine developing type of drones and type of with AI help that Russia is in the past 4 months is pretty much suffering from.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, most experts around the world agree that Ukraine has become one of the world authorities when it comes to drone technology. What else is the focus of Ukraine's strategy at the moment? Is it about protecting critical infrastructure? Is it about more advances on the battlefield, or diplomacy with Europe? What's the key focus at this point?
Ukraine right now, actually, it's a time for Ukraine, because Ukraine developed pretty strong capabilities. So controlling the logistics from the roads that go to Crimea, it's right now in the past Ukrainian and drones go as far as famously occupied by Russia, where thousands and thousands of people to recreate this city as a Russian city, building the theater of children. So, but it's all of that. Is right now controlling Russian it gets 130, 150 kilometers. So basically, attacking Russian ammunition.
Okay, Yulia, sorry, forgive me. We're having a few technical issues with the connection. We're going to have to leave it there. We do very much appreciate your analysis. Thank you for joining us from New York. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away. A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, Andy Mioch has joined us with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what have you got on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, oil prices have dropped and markets have rallied following the announcement of a preliminary deal between Iran and the U.S. that would see the end of the conflict and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Fox is buying the streaming company Roku. Paramount's acquisition of Warner Brothers has been cleared by the U.S. government, and BBC is reportedly set to cut hundreds of jobs. So let's have a look. First up, global oil prices have tumbled to a multi-month low amid fresh hopes that a U.S.-Iran peace deal could end the greatest energy supply crisis in the history of the market. The price of Brent crude dropped about 5% as the new trading week began.
Brent plunged over 4% toward $83 per barrel on Monday, touching a 2-month low. This comes after the US and Iran reached a peace agreement aimed at ending the Middle East conflict and reopening the Strait of Hormuz by the end of the week. US President Donald Trump announced that oil shipments from the Persian Gulf could soon resume, including the lifting of a US blockade on Iranian ports. The agreement also reportedly includes provisions for dismantling Iran's nuclear program, along with economic incentives if Tehran meets its commitments. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister confirmed that a deal had been reached and said the text would be released following a signing ceremony in Switzerland. Oil markets have faced significant disruption since the conflict erupted in late February, with the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz affecting roughly 1/5 of global oil shipments.
Well, markets worldwide are welcoming the Iran deal, with major indexes on the rise. Wall Street, European and Asian markets are in the green, and traders will be watching every move ahead of the agreement's expected signing in Switzerland on Friday.
Europe's Stoxx 600 hit a record high on Monday, boosted by a relief rally across most sectors after the US and Iran reached a preliminary agreement that would open the Strait of Hormuz and end the war in the Middle East. The pan-European Stoxx 600 index rose 1% to 639 points by 8 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, surpassing its previous all-time high, scaled on February 27th. With Monday's gains, the benchmark has recouped all of its conflict-related losses, while the Euro Stoxx Volatility Index hit its lowest since the start of the conflict in late February. European shares had broadly underperformed their peers in the US and Asia since March, largely due to the continent's reliance on the Strait of Hormuz for crucial oil supplies and its smaller exposure to AI technology stocks. With Monday's gains, the Stoxx 600 is now up 7.9% for the year, narrowing its gap with the US benchmark S&P 500 that has risen more than 8%. Germany's DAX index led gains among major regional indexes, rising 1.6% to a two-week high. Shortly before midday, the German DAX was at 24,919 points. Meanwhile, Asian stocks surged as traders took in news of a deal between Iran and the US. Stock indexes in Japan and South Korea jumped around 5% in early trade on Monday, with more modest gains for markets in China. Wall Street's main indexes opened higher on Monday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 162 points at the open, the S&P 500 rose 85 points, while the Nasdaq Composite rose 558 points at the opening bell.
In the world of media, Fox is buying streaming platform Roku in a cash and stock deal worth about $22 billion. The transaction is valued at $160 per Roku share, and the deal is expected to close in the first half of next year.
Fox signed an agreement to acquire Roku in a deal valued at about $22 billion, the company said. Roku is one of the first companies to bring streaming platforms like Netflix and YouTube to television through connected devices and smart TVs. Its business is largely driven by advertising and subscription revenue from streaming apps on its platform. Advertising is the largest component, with revenue of $613 million in the first quarter, up 27% year-on-year. Fox will acquire Roku for $160 per share in a cash and stock deal, which represents a premium of 11.4% to Roku's last close. The deal is expected to close in the first half of calendar year 2027.
Still with media, the U.S. Justice Department's Antitrust Division said it has cleared Paramount Skydance's planned $110 billion acquisition of Warner Bros. Discovery, saying it was unlikely to harm competition or consumers.
The U.S. Justice Department's Antitrust Division said it has cleared Paramount Skydance Corporation's planned acquisition of Warner Bros. Discovery. It said the $110 billion transaction was unlikely to harm competition or consumers. Paramount thanked the DOJ for its review of the transaction. It said the deal would allow the company to better compete in an industry defined by an intense scramble for audiences, talent, technology, and investment. The Federal Communications Commission has yet to approve Paramount's petition for foreign investors to own up to 100% of the deal's debt. Several in Hollywood have expressed concern that the merger would result in fewer jobs and less diversity of storytelling. Sources familiar with the matter told Reuters earlier that California, New York, and other US states are preparing a lawsuit to block the deal.
Across the Atlantic, the BBC is set to cut hundreds of jobs in a radical downsizing Financial Times reports. Cuts are likely to affect specific radio shows as part of corporation plans to reduce costs.
Britain's BBC is set to cut hundreds of jobs across its core news division next week, in the first part of its downsizing, the Financial Times reported on Monday, citing people close to the situation. Departments across the corporation have been ordered to cut about a tenth of their costs under wider plans expected to result in a total of about 2,000 jobs lost to save hundreds of millions of pounds, according to the FT report, and the BBC's news division is set to be the first to reveal its plans next week. The news teams employ about a quarter of the BBC's more than 20,000 staff. The announcement is expected to affect specific radio shows, with insiders warning that the cuts could be noticeable to BBC viewers and listeners.
And finally, digital payments giant Nuvei struck a deal to buy Payoneer for more than $2.5 billion in a cross-border payments push. The combined company is expected to generate some $3 billion in annual revenue.
Nuvei will buy cross-border payments firm Payoneer for about $2.75 billion in cash, the company said on Monday, as the Canadian fintech aims to expand globally. Payment companies have been consolidating to expand their reach in faster-growing areas such as cross-border and business payments. The deal will also position Nuvei for growth in stablecoin transactions and AI-driven commerce, and give it access to major marketplace clients including Amazon, Walmart, eBay and Airbnb. The transaction is expected to close in mid-2027, subject to shareholder approval at Payoneer and regulatory clearances. The combined company is expected to generate around $3 billion in annual revenue and process more than $500 billion in annual payment volume, the company said.
And that'd be all in the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Thank you, Andy. Very interesting as always. Thanks very much. Okay, after the break, just days after Armenia's parliamentary elections, senior officials from Azerbaijan and Armenia have met to discuss the peace process. Is this a sign of renewed momentum or a recalibration of negotiations after the vote? Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Another major meeting has just taken place in Armenia. Well, on Sunday, the assistant to the president of Azerbaijan, Hikmet Hajiev, met with Armen Grigoryan, secretary of Armenia's Security Council. Well, the two discussed issues related to the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace agenda and the normalization process. They stressed the importance of maintaining bilateral dialogue to support lasting peace and stability in the region. The landmark meeting follows Armenia's parliamentary elections last week, with Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's civil contract party winning the majority of the votes. So what does this first high-level contact after the election tell us about the direction of the peace process? Well, let's bring in now our Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkan Amishov. Orkan, always good to see you. Thank you very much for coming in. Very interesting this, isn't it? Talk to me about the timing of this meeting.
The timing of this meeting is absolutely crucial, taking place just 7 days after the 7th of June vote, parliamentary vote, and on the day when the results were declared officially official. I think it's very important. Of course, it was planned. It wasn't that Mr. Hajiev and Mr. Grigoryan just 2 days before the meeting decided to organize this meeting, informing their superiors, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan respectively. Of course, naturally, it was pre-planned. It was, I'm sure, I imagine, it must have been agreed upon. The decision to the meeting was taken weeks before the actual meeting itself. Timing is very important. First of all, it means that the parties, both Azerbaijan and Armenia, are loyal to the peace agenda and they will carry on in the self-same spirit. The process will remain bilateral and they will do their level best to ensure the proper implementation of the peace agenda, which amongst many other things involves, of course, naturally eventual signing of the deal. In order for that to happen, of course, Armenia needs to sort out its constitutional problem, and with this 2/3 majority in the National Assembly, that may prove to be challenging. There are some concerns about it in Azerbaijan. Naturally, another aspect of this agenda is a delimitation and demarcation process. Delimitation and demarcation element of the peace agenda is being dealt by deputy first ministers, of course, but naturally presidential aide and national security secretary, they lay the foundation for future bilateral interaction.
Yes.
Allow me to say something very crucial regarding this particular track, Hajiev-Grigoryan track. It's a very important part of the peace agenda. These two people are very close to their respective leaders, naturally work very closely with their leaders. They effectively work very hard. And allow me to give you one particular example which will create a necessary picture for us to understand why this meeting is important, amongst many other reasons why it should be deemed as important. Back in September 2022, just a couple of weeks before, Azerbaijan and Armenia crucially agreed in Prague on the 6th of October on the mutual recognition of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Mr. Hajiev and Mr. Grigoryan met in Washington. They agreed on their so-called Washington document. And that document was so essential for the peace process. Effectively, the interstate process between Azerbaijan and Armenia was distinguished from the internal Azerbaijani process involving official Baku and Karabakh Armenians back then. And that was a prelude to the recognition of mutual sovereignty and territorial integrity on mutual basis in line with 1991 Almaty Declaration. So that was a preparation for that. That was a key bottleneck back then in September 2022, and these two officials sorted it out. They prepared the fortuitous ground for the leaders to agree on something fundamental. So that's the reason I think Hajiev-Grigoryan track should be deemed as incredibly, incredibly important. And also, of course, these two officials are related to the Peace Bridge Initiative, of which I happen to be a member. We welcomed Azerbaijani Armenian colleagues back in Gabala 2 months ago, and you remember that Mr. Hajiev was present. He responded to the questions of Armenian colleagues in the self-same fashion as a reciprocal measure. Before, when the meeting was in Armenia, Mr. Grigoryan responded to the questions of Azerbaijani experts and civil society representatives. So there are many dimensions to this track, and I think the fact that it took place on the day when the results were declared official, just a week after the pivotal parliamentary elections, and bearing in mind the track and its multidimensional nature, I think we should take it into account very, very seriously indeed.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Orkan. This Hajiev-Grigoryan track, as you put it, is clearly really, really important. It's been developing, as you say, for some time. What is the next stage? Because this isn't one of those meetings where there are great announcements, you know, sort of.
It's a preparatory meeting. These are two officials. They are simply assigned by their leaders to meet to lay the foundation for future interaction. Sorry.
So no one's emerging with kind of prosaic bullet points and sort of big headlines.
No.
But what is the next stage now? What does this pave the way for to come next?
Big headlines are left for the meetings of the leaders, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan. Certain things may emerge from the meeting of foreign ministers as well, of course, from the meeting of the first deputy minister as well. We got separate tracks. Even heads of parliament also meet regularly. But of course, there's 4 tracks that I mentioned: the meeting of leaders, the presidential aide and national security secretary, foreign ministers, and the first deputy minister are the 4 separate tracks of the wider peace agenda. Of course, all of the 3 tracks, they serve one function: prepare the foundation for leaders to agree on something very important. But there are a number of issues to be sorted out, to be honest with you. One of them is Armenia's constitution. And clearly, Mr. Pashinyan and his civil contract party had majority in the National Assembly, constitutional, proper majority, which may be called supermajority, 71 seats. Now he's got only 64.
Yes.
Although, of course, naturally, he defeated his detractors in the light of the massive Russian hybrid threat. There are also some question marks about the procedural elements of the election, the pressure employed against the opposition. Whatever you may think of the opposition and its intentions, the fair elections require that everybody is able to say whatever they want to say. There are some question marks, and some analysts are saying that, well, there was a similar degree of intervention on the side of the government back in October 2024 in Georgia, but international evaluation of that was about backsliding, about severe violation of election code. But in this particular case, impression given is that just because Pashinyan seems to be the right person and he has got a proper agenda, which is within the interest of Armenia, nobody is very critical of him apart from Russia and its allies. So that's another important aspect, of course. But fundamental thing for these 2 countries to make sure peace process is not slackened. This is one thing. And Armenia should come up with a decent proposal regarding how they're going to change their constitution. Because you interviewed Arsène Kharatyan just, I think, a couple of day after the elections, and he said that, well, parliamentary method, parliamentary avenue is only one of the avenues. There are different ways.
Yes.
So Azerbaijani, the public opinion and Azerbaijani think tank community should be assured of that very avenue coming into the fore.
He did seem very confident. I was even slightly surprised at his confidence level. I mean, how confident do you feel, Orkan? You've been on both sides of the fence, you know, as a journalist, but also as an expert
a man of two hats
inside the room. How confident do you feel? I mean, it looks to me that this is something that we should take confidence from, that the positive meeting of minds far outweighs any of the smaller technical sort of hurdles to jump.
There are many technical hurdles. Some of them are genuine hurdles, some of them may be deemed as contrived hurdles. When I talk to my Armenian colleagues wearing my analyst hat, and we really try to understand what's happening, and I really see that they do not believe that the preamble of their constitution is a genuine obstacle to peace. They believe that Azerbaijan emphasizing this point in order to make sure it achieves complete total victory over Armenia, because clearly Armenian leadership, including Mr. Pashinyan himself, over the decades was saying that, well, Karabakh actually is not part of Azerbaijan. Actually, Almaty Declaration of 1991 has absolutely nothing to do with Azerbaijan territorial integrity.
And Orkan, sorry to jump in, do they believe that Azerbaijan is unreasonably making a big deal out of that aspect, or do they believe that Azerbaijan is doing it for some sort of strategic reason?
All of the people that I interviewed and I spoke to, they understand why Azerbaijan is doing it.
Okay.
They understand because they are acutely conscious of their nation's past. This is a nation which effectively engaged in military occupation of a sovereign country of a nation, Karabakh region. This is a country which engaged in that occupation and refused to withdraw, even from the adjacent territory, let alone the actual former administrative unit called Nagorno-Karabakh, which is now Karabakh Economic Region and so forth. And they came to realize, the preponderant part of Armenian establishment came to realize that Azerbaijani territorial integrity must be recognized only after the war of 2020. The facts on the ground changed. So what Azerbaijan did, Guy? Azerbaijan changed the facts on the ground by means of applying international law, using force to restore international legal order in this region. And then Armenia, of course, was forced to accept this reality. And after being forced to accept reality, Armenia is saying that we recognize your territorial integrity, but what is the point of treating our preamble of our constitution as an obstacle? It does not have legally binding nature. We have a constitutional court ruling about it. But the fundamental matter is that constitution is very important. Preamble is part of the constitution in general. And naturally, Armenia, in the view of Azerbaijani political establishment, should make a decisive decision. And they need to get rid of this miatsum ambition by means of public vote. Azerbaijan is saying that we're signing the deal not with the government of Mr. Pashinyan, who actually failed to maintain its full supermajority, with that majority being downgraded into this not simple but absolute majority, which is a third-fifth majority. We need to see that ultimate national will. And they're saying that Azerbaijan has been insisting on this for some time, and they say that we have a degree of consistency. Election is very important, and facts that Pashinyan defeat his detractors is good, but constitutional obstacle is still there. No one has removed it from the agenda. And we notice among some political analysts in Armenia and in the West that, bearing in mind that Pashinyan defeated his detractors, why to insist on this particular condition? Let's sign a deal, the circumstances on the ground will change, there will be Turkish-Armenian normalization. Why to insist on this obstacle, which is very difficult to remove procedurally? For Azerbaijan, it means something very important. Armenian analysts do realize it, but some of them expect a degree of benevolence from Azerbaijan, which Azerbaijan is not planning to give for very strategic and legal reasons.
And you could argue, Orkan, that Mr. Pashinyan has already faced the threat of detractors along those lines. He's already faced the threat of those who are arguing you're not strong enough. You're not taking Armenia's sovereignty, you're not dealing with it strongly enough. He's already faced the threat of influence from Russia. And the sort of sensible, pragmatic majority of citizens have sided with Mr. Pashinyan. So you could argue that there's less to fear in that regard than perhaps there may have been anticipated in the past.
Well, his victory is incredibly important, there's no doubt about that. But we look at Armenia's parliamentary structure, on less than 50% of the registered voters voted in favor of the civil contract party, around 49.8%. That translates into 64 seats in the National Assembly, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's 64% of the registered voters. And then, of course, he lost a constitutional majority. He's got only absolute majority, which he managed to retain thanks to the party of Mr. Sarukyan, known as Prosperous Armenia, failing to reach that 4% threshold.
Yes, 3.99.
Something very dramatic that happened there. I'm not entirely sure the actual figure, but I think he needed 10 votes in order to get to that. Had he managed to get that, Pashinyan's absolute majority, or otherwise known as 3/5 majority, would have been simple majority, depriving him of the opportunity to sort out some of the domestic matters, let alone the wider interstate matter with Azerbaijan. And will he be able to conduct this referendum? First of all, there will be problems in terms of actually initiating the process because of the lack of constitutional majority. And to win that referendum, he will need 25% of the registered voters participating, and he will need the result in favor of the in favor of the proposal. Although many Armenian colleagues of mine, analysts, when I speak to them wearing my journalistic hat or wearing my analyst hat, they convince us in the meetings, and there's no harm in revealing this, of course, that the real problem is not about, in the context of the referendum, problem is not about Azerbaijani demand, because they are adopting a completely new constitution. There are many other matters. And Azerbaijani demand is only part of the wider picture. They're saying that problems are related to some other issues, not to Azerbaijani demand. But it's going to be reviewed as a package, and yes or no answer will not really discriminate between Azerbaijan's demand and many other elements within that proposal. So it's a very interesting situation. I think that the crux of the matter is the constitutional obstacle there needs to be addressed. We can find innovative solutions to deal with it, but it's important that there. Can Azerbaijan and Armenia carry on this peace agenda without referendum? There are a number of issues that could be done without referendum, but without referendum there will be no peace deal. That seems to be very certain to everybody else.
And where is the Armenian side on the general question of whether or not any of those innovative solutions could be considered? Are they intransigent on that, or are they amenable to the idea of discussing possible?
I think the preponderant majority, they are pretty amenable to talk about these matters and find innovative solutions. But however innovative the solution may be, the obstacle must be removed. You should have a new constitution. So innovation does not preclude from removing that element.
Yes.
Innovation means that we can find an interim solution, but basically that issue must be sorted out. Mr. Pashinyan himself, in early 2024, whilst addressing his local electorate, was saying that Armenia is sort of in the state of having this arrayed attire, attracting the sort of predators coming from different sides. Basically, he was referring to Armenia's constitution laying claims both on Azerbaijani territory and Turkish territory, because we know that according to current Armenian constitution, they use a term Western Armenia in relation to Eastern Turkey. All of these things must be, of course, removed. There is a considerable body of opinion within the Armenian establishment, which is a very prevalent point of opinion, and amongst the people who support Pashinyan, that yes, indeed, there are problems and we need to sort them out. But they are slightly critical of Azerbaijani point of view that without that obstacle being removed, peace deal cannot be signed. There are different ways in the mind of many Armenians, but my fundamental belief is that, bearing in mind that Azerbaijan has long been in the habit of producing particular demands and carrying out those demands and making sure those demands are being fulfilled, I don't think there will be any retrenchment. The way things are happening and the way they're evolving, they give rise to this particular point of view, which seems to be very prevalent now.
Okay, whichever hat you're wearing, it's always a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay, after the break, the UK government is facing growing backlash over its controversial social media restrictions. Supporters say the measures are necessary to protect young people online, while critics warn they could reshape the boundaries of free expression in the digital age. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced plans to ban children under the age of 16 from using social media, describing online platforms as addictive and harmful to young people's well-being. If approved by Parliament, the measures would come into force in 2027. Our correspondent Zainab Farizada reports now from the UK.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced plans to ban under-16s from using social media platforms including Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram and X. Speaking in Downing Street, Starmer says social media is making children unhappy, exposing them to bullying and abuse, and is designed to be addictive. He said children are spending less time reading, doing homework, socializing and getting enough sleep. He said that government would not compromise on children's safety and well-being, insisting the ban must happen and will happen. The proposal follows similar moves in Australia. Also, ministers say the UK plans to go further. Additional measures under consideration include restrictions on AI chatbots, tighter controls on gaming and live streaming platforms, and curfews for older teenagers. The government says a recent consultation found 90% of parents support setting the minimum age for social media use at 16. If approved by Parliament, the ban would come into force in spring 2027. The plans have been welcomed by Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, who said they would help parents protect children online. But Reform UK leader Nigel Farage questioned whether the ban would work in practice, arguing that young people could use VPNs to bypass age verification. Technology Secretary Liz Kendall called the move a bold step towards a safer online environment, saying tech companies had failed to protect young users. Regulator Ofcom said it is ready to work with the government on implementing new protections, adding it has already overseen some of the strongest online safety reforms. Bereaved parents and campaigners have also welcomed the announcement, while questions remain over enforcement and how platforms will verify users' ages. Zainab Farizada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
So exactly what is changing, how are platforms responding, and what wider implications could these measures have for the future of the internet? Well, let's bring in now our very own Katie Wilson. Katie, great to see you. Quite innovative, this pretty dramatic, thing to announce from Keir Starmer. Just talk us through the ban and which platforms are affected.
Yes, so Keir Starmer's announced under 16s are going to be banned from using social media, and that extends to Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook and X. So think of platforms that allow users to post material and interact with algorithms. So there's a distinction between social media and messaging services, so this isn't going to affect platforms like WhatsApp or Signal. Starmer says social media is making children unhappy, making it easier for bullies to abuse children, and it's designed to be addictive, talking about these algorithms. There, he says a ban will give children more time, security, and more freedom to grow up, as well as more opportunities. He says the government's not prepared to compromise on the safety and happiness of children, and that includes in the regulation and enforcement of this ban. And as Zainab, our correspondent, mentioned there, this is listening to and learning from countries like Australia, where a similar ban has already been introduced, and Australia was the first country in the world to introduce that last December, and the Australian Prime Minister's already congratulated Starmer on what he calls an important step. But the UK government's actually going further than the Australian ban with what Starmer calls world-leading action on things like gaming services and live stream platforms. And if this gets passed in Parliament, we're expecting to see this come into force around spring next year.
Wow, quite soon. I mean, different groups, I guess, in society will be reacting differently. The public, we've got may have one particular view. Big tech firms, I imagine, will take another. And also parents. What are the different groups saying?
Yeah, so let's start with the teenagers that have actually been affected by this. So there's generally mixed reactions. Like, teenagers do acknowledge that they don't want to be exposed to harmful content when they go online, but they think that more regulation makes more sense than a total blanket ban. And actually, media and tech experts are mostly agreeing with that, where they say improving digital literacy is better than stopping kids from going online until they're 16. And parents are a bit more split. I think there's one camp that wants to be the ones deciding about their children's online activity, and they feel like that is a decision for each individual family. But others think, you know, at least this ban, even if it's going to be very difficult enforcing, is going to start a conversation about how young people are safe online. Support from the ban is coming in from teaching unions across the countries. Teachers say that they're the ones picking up the pieces on a Monday morning if children have been scrolling on TikTok till 3 a.m. the night before. And the National Education Union says teachers see every day how social media is harming children, disrupting their learning, isolating them and exposing them to content they're simply not ready for. There's other organisations, like organisations that support LGBTQ+ children or disabled children, and they've expressed concerns about this, as they say it could erode the lifelines that young people have found on social platforms and access to support. So the Royal Society for Blind Children says social media can become a place where friendships can be made and where young people can express themselves and feel less alone. So some of these charities are saying that groups of people that might feel alone already, this ban could isolate them further. The Green Party have said if this is going to happen, they want to see more investment in youth services and creative activities for young people to fill the void that's going to be created by this ban. And the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has responded to this and said there's going to be more investment in art, in sport, so that it's not just simply taking something away from teenagers. Big tech companies, of course, they've spoken out. So a spokesperson from YouTube says it's a vital resource for young people, in that a blanket ban would push children away from these curated, supervised, beneficial experiences towards less safe services. Obviously YouTube, you know, things like study YouTubers are a thing for teenagers, so I'm interested to see how that's going to work. And this has been echoed by Snapchat, a messaging service that allows users to post disappearing photos in the form of stories. And it says the majority of time spent on Snapchat is for private messaging between friends and family, so an outright ban isn't necessarily going to make teens safer. Meta, that's the owner of Instagram, Facebook and WhatsApp, they're echoing this sort of sentiment. They say a ban risks driving young people to unregulated alternatives that lack built-in protections and parental controls. And they say any restrictions must be underpinned by an age verification system on devices, so people aren't asked to hand over ID to dozens of individual services to prove their age. I would say across the political spectrum, there is actually large support for this ban across the whole spectrum, but obviously the opposition are asking questions about how the government actually plans to enforce this.
Yes, and in terms of the politics, Katie, what about the timing of this? Why do you think Keir Starmer has chosen to do this now?
Yes, so activists have pointed to this. So Ian Russell, his daughter Molly, took her own life aged 14 after viewing harmful content online. And he has said that these sledgehammer techniques like bans would only cause more problem. Now, he's been campaigning since 2017 for better online protections. And he says this campaign has been rushed for political reasons. As we know, Starmer is in a bit of political hot water at the moment, and this does seem to be something that has got broad support from all the political parties, from parents. So the government says 9 out of 10 parents support a social media ban, and YouGov polling largely echoes this as well. It's a bit lower than the government's figures, but they say 77% of parents backed a ban. So that's kind of raising eyebrows among campaigners that have campaigned for this for a long time. So they were actually expecting this announcement to come a bit later in the year. Obviously, they've been consulting with Starmer, with the government. So there's a few eyebrows raised about why this has been brought forward. Russell had spoken to the BBC back in January, and he said actually the government should be enforcing the laws that we already have more robustly rather than imposing these bans. So he's shared some research conducted on behalf of the Molly Rose Foundation, that's a suicide prevention charity, and he says only slightly fewer children were seeing harmful content following the introduction of the Online Safety Act in 2023. So it's gone from 37% to 34%. So and that Online Safety Act was meant to ensure children didn't view illegal or certain kinds of harmful content online. So he says the government should be focusing on this rather than introducing these bans, which probably is going to, stir up a bit more support for Starmer. A Downing Street spokesperson, however, says we've undertaken a thorough consultation and we'll set out next steps in due course. And they say this isn't about politics and it's about protecting children.
It's very interesting that though, isn't it? Because of course, consultations, white papers, proposals, they're all things that are not about enforcement. They're essentially bits of paper, aren't they? And very interesting that one of the parents who'd suffered so terribly actually doesn't seem that impressed with what's been proposed. In terms of the enforcement side though, Katie, this age verification, I mean, how is that going to work? Do you just say, yes, I'm over 18 or no, I'm not? I mean, presumably it's more sophisticated than that.
Yeah, and I think that's always going to be the question about how it's going to be enforced. Things like TV licenses in the UK, you just tick a box and that's it. There's no real enforcement going there. So the government say they'll introduce highly effective age assurance to enforce its social media ban. So what does that actually mean? Well, that could be credit card checks, email-based age estimation or facial age estimation. That's just some of the methods that were suggested when the Online Safety Act determined that over 18s would have to prove their age to access adult.
I mean, that's like the digital version. I remember when I was 17, we would put on glasses and try and make yourself look older to get into a pub. I mean, this is just like the digital version of that, I guess.
That's it. And comparisons have been made actually to alcohol, in that, teenagers probably will drink alcohol before they reach their 18th birthday. So it's more about, I think, not necessarily enforcing this stringently, but maybe making people think twice about online safety and sort of raising those questions. The government has actually said Ofcom are going to set out how the age verification process will actually work over the coming months, and there is unbelievably a trade body of companies who provide ways to prove your age, the Age Verification Providers Association.
Wow.
And they say establishing a minimum age of 16, it actually has additional challenges because some younger people have fewer sources of authoritative age data available to them than adults.
Yes.
So, for example, fewer teenagers are going to have passports, but there are other sources of age evidence that's available, such as bank accounts, electoral registration records, and provisional driving licenses. But of course, that raises concern in itself, in that digital rights campaigners have raised privacy concerns about the ban, saying that age verification on platforms will incur an enormous privacy intrusion, and age checks that are going to require bank details, face scan, or identifications are actually quite intrusive methods. But the government has said that as adults, they don't expect adults to need to complete checks because some social media accounts may have been open for more than 16 years, or it could be linked to a credit card or an email address that's already been verified through other means.
Okay, very interesting. Now, you mentioned Australia earlier, Katie. They were obviously the first country, as you rightly said, to do this. How have things gone in Australia? How's it all worked out?
So if you ask Australian teens, they would say not very well. Anecdotally, most teenagers actually still seem to be on it. Kids have told the BBC it's taken them less than 5 minutes to outsmart the age checks being relied on to enforce it. And after 6 months, it's clear that implementing the policy does remain incredibly difficult. 70% of parents told Australia's internet regulator that their children were still on these platforms, and that's according to a recent survey. But over 5 million accounts have been deactivated by the tech firms as of January, but a substantial proportion of teenagers have either kept their profiles or managed to create new ones, or have bypassed those age gating systems. Now, the process in Australia is that there's going to be fines handed out to big tech companies. That hasn't happened yet, but the eSafety Commission says it is investigating potential non-compliance by Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and YouTube. But of course, the question is actually going to be, how do you measure the success of this legislation? Is it mental health outcomes? Is it the less time spent scrolling? Is it the number of accounts shut down? And Australia have been advocating for other countries to follow in its footsteps. So I think having an ally like the UK strengthens Australia's position on this. You know, we even need to think about how the White House is going to react, and could they take issue with this ban when, you know, these powerful US social media firms are opposing it. So I think Australia will be happy to have an ally in the UK in a political sense. And I think the fact that the UK has followed Australia does give Canberra an aura of success in regards to this policy.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. We'll have to see how it pans out in the UK. Katie, as always, a great pleasure. Thank you for coming in. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll check in on our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić is in Tbilisi on Monday on an official visit. It's the first time a Serbian head of state is in Georgia. Now, he arrived alongside his wife and a state delegation and was received at the Atoneli Presidential Palace by Georgian President Mikhail Kavalishvili. Now, the two leaders are expected to hold a one-on-one meeting later in the day. Our very own Nini Nikolashvili has more now in Tbilisi.
For the first time, a Serbian president has visited Georgia. Aleksandar Vučić touched down at Tbilisi International Airport in the morning, where he was met by Georgia's Minister of Economy, Mariam Kriushvili. She described the visit as significant for trade and economic relations between the two countries. Georgia and Serbia are currently in negotiations over a free trade agreement. The potential benefits include increased trade turnover and higher Georgian exports. Kriushvili indicated that progress has been considerable. She suggested that if finalized, it could set an example for how quickly two countries can move toward this kind of agreement. From the airport, Vučić proceeded to the presidential palace for an official welcoming ceremony with President Mikhail Kavalishvili. Their one-on-one meeting, scheduled for later on Monday, is expected to cover broader questions of bilateral cooperation and partnership. The visit comes at a complex moment for Georgia, whose relations with Western institutions remain strained following domestic political tensions over the past year. Serbia itself, meanwhile, has its own complicated balancing act between EU membership aspirations and closer ties with Russia. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Turkish authorities have secured part of the Black Sea coast after a drone filled with explosives crash-landed on a beach in Bartın province. Now, the incident highlights how the Russia-Ukraine war continues to affect countries beyond the immediate conflict zone. Our correspondent Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkish security forces have carried out a controlled detonation of an armed drone that crash-landed on a beach along the country's Black Sea coast. The incident occurred on Sunday at Kapisuyu Beach in Turkey's Bartın province. Local authorities quickly evacuated the area and established a security perimeter. Bomb disposal specialists were dispatched to the scene after it was determined that the unmanned aerial vehicle was carrying live munitions. The explosives were later destroyed in a controlled operation without incident. Officials, meanwhile, have not formally identified the origin of the drone, but local media reports suggest it may be one of several unmanned systems linked to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine that have drifted into the Black Sea. The incident has brought renewed attention to the wider regional impact of the conflict, which has increasingly spilled beyond the territories of the two warring countries. Since Russia's invasion of eastern Ukraine in 2022, Turkish authorities have periodically recovered naval mines, unmanned surface vessels, and aerial drones that enter Turkish territorial waters after drifting across the Black Sea. Several similar incidents have been recorded along Turkey's northern coastline, particularly in provinces bordering the western and central Black Sea. As a NATO member that borders the Black Sea, Turkey has sought to maintain balanced relations with both Moscow and Kiev, while also taking measures to safeguard maritime security and commercial shipping. The latest incident highlights the continued risks posed by military hardware operating in and around the Black Sea, while underscoring concerns that the consequences of the war can extend far beyond the battlefield itself. This is Adam Mara for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
The European Union has rejected reports of negotiations to establish migrant process centres with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Now, the comments came following media reports suggesting the Central Asian states could be considered as potential partners on migration. More now from our correspondent in Almaty.
The European Union has denied reports of negotiations with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to create migrant centers for asylum seekers rejected by EU countries. The EU's Special Representative for Central Asia, Edward Tsipras, said Brussels has not held and is not holding any consultations with either country. He added that the European Union does have a legal framework that allows for the possible establishment of such centers. He stressed that they have no concrete negotiations involving Central Asian states. The comments follow a report by Politico. It quoted diplomatic sources saying that several European governments were considering creating special facilities outside of the EU for returning migrants and processing asylum applications. And according to the publication, those reported proposals could possibly include between 8 and 10 countries, including Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Kazakhstan rejected the reports earlier this month, which also said the migrant centers could be established in exchange for a simplified visa scheme with the European Union. Uzbekistan has also publicly denied holding any talks with Brussels on the issue. Migration remains a politically sensitive issue across Europe as governments push for tougher policies. According to the European Commission, only around 20% of people who are ordered to leave the EU actually do so. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Uzbekistan and 5 partner countries have signed an agreement for the further development of the Kaska Plus transport corridor. It's a strategic route linking Central Asia with the South Caucasus and Turkey, which provides an alternative trade connection between Asia and Europe.
Representatives of Uzbekistan, Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan and Kyrgyzstan have agreed on new measures to strengthen cooperation within CESA called Kaska Plus railway corridor. It was established in 2019 and connects Central Asia with the South Caucasus and Turkey, helping facilitate cargo transportation between regional and international markets. Freight traffic along the road has grown steadily in recent years, with cargo volumes transported by Uzbekistan increasing 5-fold compared to 2019. During the meeting, railway officials reviewed the corridor's performance in 2025 and the first quarter of 2026, identifying operational bottlenecks and discussing ways to improve efficiency. Particular attention was given to lowering transit times, improving logistics services, and developing a more competitive tariff policy to attract additional cargo flows. The 6 countries signed a protocol outlining further cooperation and measures to increase freight transportation volumes. Earlier initiatives within the Kaska Plus framework included proposals to introduce digital tracking systems for wagons and containers, improve coordination among railway operators, and expand refrigerated transportation services for agricultural exports. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Pakistan is claiming a significant diplomatic role in the breakthrough agreement between the United States and Iran, aimed at ending more than 3 months of conflict. Well, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced the deal on June the 15th, ahead of confirmation from US President Donald Trump. Our correspondent Mariam Zia reports from Pakistan.
As details emerge about the diplomacy behind the US-Iran peace framework, attention is also turning to the role played by regional powers, including Pakistan. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced on June 15 that Washington and Tehran had reached a framework aimed at ending more than 3 months of conflict. The agreement is due to formally signed in Geneva on June 19. It includes an end to military operations, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and further negotiations on unresolved issues. Pakistani officials say Islamabad worked alongside Doha, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt to maintain diplomatic channels throughout the crisis. The effort received international recognition when UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres thanked Pakistan and other regional countries for supporting negotiations that led to the agreement. In Pakistan, leaders across the political spectrum welcomed the development. President Asif Ali Zardari described it as a step towards lasting peace, while Pakistani Deputy Prime Minister Ishaq Dar also said that it demonstrated the value of sustained diplomacy over confrontation. As negotiations move into a new phase, the agreement is also highlighting the increasingly important role regional actors are playing in efforts to resolve the international conflicts. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
The United Nations Security Council is meeting on Monday to discuss the future of its assistance mission in Afghanistan, just one day before the mission's current mandate expires. For the latest, we cross now to our correspondent Tamim Bahis in Kabul.
The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, known as UNAMA, says the Security Council will review the future of the mission. UNAMA has operated in Afghanistan since 2002. Its main responsibilities have included coordinating humanitarian assistance, monitoring the human rights situation, facilitating dialogue, and supporting engagement between Afghanistan and the wider international community. Monday's discussions come at a critical time, with UNAMA's current mandate due to expire tomorrow, June 16. In March, the Security Council extended the mandate for only 3 months. Council members must decide now whether to approve another extension, revise the mission's responsibility, or allow the mandate to end. Supporters say the mission is vital when it comes to coordinating aid and maintaining communication between Afghanistan and the international community. There are also calls for the mission to remain neutral and carry out its work in a way that reflects the existing realities inside Afghanistan. The key issue to watch during today's meeting is whether Security Council members can agree on the length and scope of a new mandate. Any decision or failure to reach one could affect international humanitarian coordination and future diplomatic engagement with Afghanistan. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Shusha is hosting a major international conference on regional security and peace building as Azerbaijan and Turkey mark 5 years since the Shusha Declaration. A News' Anastasia Lavrina reports.
Today marks the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Shusha Declaration, a historic document that elevated the brotherly relations between Azerbaijan and Turkey to the level of an alliance. In an increasingly fragmented and uncertain world, where geopolitical tensions, regional conflicts, and new security challenges continue to emerge, the importance of strong partnerships and strategic cooperation has become greater than ever. The Shusha Declaration stands as a clear example of how shared values, mutual trust, and a common vision can create a solid foundation for stability and progress. The significance of this anniversary is further enhanced by the fact that Shusha is hosting the international conference titled Regional Contribution to Global Security, Peace Building in the South Caucasus, and organized by the New Azerbaijan Party. The choice of venue carries a powerful message. Once subjected to occupation and destruction, Shusha has been transformed into a center of dialogue, international engagement, and cooperation. Today, the city welcomes distinguished guests from different countries to discuss peace, security, and the future of the South Caucasus. Signed on June 15 in 2021 by President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev and President of Turkey Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Shusha Declaration is far more than a bilateral agreement. The document formalized a strategic alliance between two brotherly nations and established a comprehensive framework for cooperation in security, defense, economy, energy, transport, education, culture, and foreign policy. The declaration reaffirmed a commitment of mutual support, strengthened regional connectivity, and also created new opportunities for cooperation and development. Its significance extends beyond Azerbaijan and Turkey.
US President Donald Trump said an agreement with Iran has been signed and that the text of the deal would be released sometime after a formal signing on Friday, adding that the Strait of Hormuz would also be fully open. Well, speaking alongside French President Emmanuel Macron ahead of this week's G7 meeting, Trump said he did not know if he would attend the Friday ceremony expected in Geneva, but that US Vice President J.D. Vance would be there.
Happy to say it's signed, the deal's all signed, and the strait is already partially opened. As you know, they're doing a little hunting for a couple of mines that they've already found. But it's essentially, ships are starting to go out now. On Friday, it'll be completely opened. The JD's coming in for it. He was originally going to do it. I'll probably be gone by then. We're having dinner in a day and a half, right? We're going to be staying quite late. So I may be involved, I may not. I would say, I want it to be released because it's a very powerful document. It's not like the Obama document, which was just a terrible document. This is a very powerful document, and I want it to be released. So probably pretty soon. I would say sometime after Friday.
Families in southern Lebanon have begun returning home now that the conflict involving the US and Iran has ended for now with an agreement. Well, thousands of people were displaced during the 3-month period.
Displaced residents in southern Lebanon have begun returning to their towns, carrying belongings and cautiously resuming daily life. For many returning families, the ceasefire brings relief and cautious optimism after months of displacement and uncertainty.
We are packing up things and we're going to our town. Thank God the ceasefire happened.
I'm filling up fuel. Then we'll put our trust in God and head to our homes. Praise be to God, Lord of the worlds. As I said, it passed safely and soundly.
Authorities have advised caution as some security measures remain in place. Lebanon experienced the deadliest spillover of the wider US-Iran conflict, with over 1 million people displaced and thousands killed. While families can now return home, rebuilding communities and restoring normalcy will take time as the region recovers.
A shipment of wheat from Russia has been sent to Armenia via Azerbaijan, departing from Bilajari railway station in Baku. Well, the train consisted of 7 wagons carrying around 490 tons of grain. After leaving Baku, it will cross the border into Georgia before continuing on to Armenia. This latest delivery is part of ongoing transit through Azerbaijan. Previous transfers included thousands of tons of grain, fertilizer, coal, aluminium and buckwheat from Russia to Armenia. China's top coal-producing region says it is expanding renewable energy while continuing to tap its vast coal reserves. Well, officials in Inner Mongolia say the region is trying to balance energy security with rapid growth in new energy.
Coal remains central to Inner Mongolia's energy strategy, and with that in mind, the region is converting the fossil fuel into oil, gas and chemicals. It's an initiative aimed at reducing the region's reliance on imports. According to local authorities, installed new energy capacity has reached 175 million kilowatts. That accounts for 9% of the national total and surpasses thermal power capacity.
It used to be a coal city,
The installed capacity of new energy in the region has already exceeded that of thermal power, so new energy is developing very rapidly. Relying on thermal power alone is not considered sustainable for Ordos in future.
Officials say renewable projects may also bring environmental benefits. One forestry official says desert photovoltaic developments could gradually reduce sandstorms that once occurred almost daily. Companies are also investing in emerging technologies. Mingyang Smart Energy says electricity generated by wind and solar power can be used to produce hydrogen through electrolysis, describing hydrogen as a clean energy source.
Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime tonight. Please do join us tomorrow for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.